the world against America. It's not that the world is against America or Israel. It's that America and Israel are promoting war against the world, are promoting war against every country in the world. And if you don't believe that, take a look to history. What's going on in Latin America, for example? One of the candidates who is leading the polls. Well, you cannot believe the polls. You can believe the massive assistance of the peoples there. In the case of Colombia, there's elections in Mexico too. Last Sunday was elections in Venezuela. Something very doubtful that Mr. Maduro is taking power again. That's another issue. But apparently, the right-wingers that have been promoted the disqualifying methods or policies that are mandatory in international law in order to help the migrants and, of course, the refugees that has been created by these proxy wars, whose only interest is to create war because it produces trillions of dollars, and not only that, but to create states that depends on the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund and the banking system around the world, like is the case of the Federal Reserve in the United States. Well, they don't need that. These countries like Iran, Libya, or Syria, they were pretty happy. Dictatorships, yes, but these dictatorships managed to live in equilibrium, as has been proven by many investigative reporters that I didn't believe in the beginning. In the beginning of 2011, I said to myself, well, these people are crazy. How can they kill their own people and gas them out and shoot them down? Then I found out that it's a strategy, which is called the dog war, used in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is to contract a couple mercenaries who kill somebody from one side, kill somebody from the other side, and start spreading rumors with professional destabilizing people contracted who start saying things to the people and supported, like it happened in the case of Syria, by militias that are contracted, mercenaries also, who said that are against the regime because the regime needs change, when it's the total opposite, as has been proven by Catholic communities that were living in Syria when the so-called Arab Spring began.
As it happened, I didn't need to fund because Putin sent a plane for me. Just joking. So John, Peter, and Neil have already beat me to thanking Gregory Sharkey, and they also stole my lines. But I do want to echo them and give a big thanks to you, Gregory, for arranging this very important event. And I also want to echo what you said about RT, because I do contribute to RT among other platforms, and not once have I been censored by RT or told what I can say. And that is the reason I contribute to RT, because if I were to try to send an editorial or an article to the BBC or The Guardian, if they deigned to publish it, I'm sure it would be butchered. So I'm also grateful to platforms like RT. So I'm also going to note that I do have some notes prepared. However, unlike the script readers of most corporate media journalists, I wrote these myself. And the reason I have my notes with me is I want to be as accurate as possible, because I'm going to be speaking first about something that is new territory to me, but I feel very strongly about it. But I want to begin with an anecdote. So recently, in one of those social media exchanges wherein a person hurls slander, but no actual argument, it was said of myself and my colleague Vanessa Beeley, Beeley and Bartlett are stooges for whatever government will pay them. For the record, I have yet to receive a payment after 10 years of on-the-ground activism and writing, and I can say the same for Vanessa Beeley. And we've already heard tonight discussion of how people are slandered in an effort to discredit what they're presenting, and because perhaps they're challenging very strongly corporate media narratives. But however, so normally I don't bother replying to such insults, but I did reply to the person's later comment, which was, "You'll happily defend a one-party military dictatorship who waste money on nuclear weapons while their people starve." So my reply was, well, I don't defend the US, I don't know what you're talking about. As prior speakers have noted, America is incessantly waging wars of aggression against sovereign nations, and soaring poverty and homelessness levels are increasing in America, which also has one of the largest prison populations in the world. And yet, all these countries we've talked about tonight are being demonized with the very same attributes that America actually holds. And this is about the American administration, not the people, because I was born in America, so I can diss the administration. But anyway, the exchange it began with was obviously regarding North Korea. And unfortunately, it's a reflection of how successful the media has been in the demonization of North Korea, and how successful the fear-mongering has been. Many people believe what's happening in North Korea is about a madman with a bad haircut and an itchy nuclear trigger finger. But no, it's not about Trump. Although he did on September 19th, 2017, vow to totally destroy North Korea. And incidentally, he did that when he was standing in the United Nations, talking about respecting states' sovereignty, while blatantly threatening the sovereignty and safety of the 25 million people of North Korea. But America, since the birth of the DPRK, or the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, has maintained a policy of aggression against that state, culminating in the 3 years of utter decimation in the 1950s of North Korea. Since then, the U.S. has repeatedly threatened nuclear destruction of the North and has considered the redeployment of tactical nuclear weapons it had in South Korea until the 90s. In addition, the U.S. and South Korea and allies run drills called war games annually. And while U.S. officials describe these twice-year assembling of significant military forces within striking range of the DPRK as routine and defensive, to North Koreans, each and every time, it could be 1950s all over again, but worse. Colin Powell in 1995 threatened to turn North Korea into a charcoal briquette, and in 2013 reiterated that threat to destroy the country. But again, not broadcast in corporate media, is that America has already done this. So with 635,000 tons of bombs, including 32,557 tons of napalm, actually a large Christian population had been ravaged by these terrorists. And I was able to speak with one family, the Ahras family, who had stayed there. And they had lost considerable weight because it wasn't the Syrian government was starving them, it was the terrorists that had thieved every last morsel of their food. And I spoke with a friend of the late Father Frans van der Loot, who was a Dutch priest who lived in Aleppo, or in Homs, I'm sorry. And he was 75 years old when he was assassinated point blank by one of these freedom-loving, democracy-bringing, moderate terrorists. And he was interesting because he didn't take a side. He neither sided with the government nor with the so-called rebels, but he did very early on write of witnessing armed men among the early protests who began to shoot at the police first. Very often the violence of the security forces has been a reaction to the brutal violence of the armed rebels. So his testimony, and also there's another priest, Father Daniel, who also has spoken words that people like, Russian propagandists like myself would say, because we're hearing it. I say that mockingly, obviously. These priests have spoken the words of Syrian civilians. And the thing is, our media has completely isolated those people. They've ignored those voices. I had an experience in January 2017 giving a panel in Montreal, Canada. And there were two Canadian journalists there who proceeded to grill me and then write their little story calling me all these things that we've talked about. But at that panel, there were many, many Syrians. And so I said to them, look, you want to talk about Syria? This room is full of Syrians. But unfortunately, although there were some Christian Syrians, there were a lot of Sunni Syrians, including from Aleppo. And what they had to say did not fit the scripted narrative of these two Canadian journalists. So they were ignored. But in getting back to in Syria, excuse me, I also, in December 2015, I visited the outskirts of a place called Al-War Homs, which was at the time occupied by different extremist factions. One notable thing I noticed there, standing at the last checkpoint and seeing roughly 100 meters away the checkpoint of the militants, was that people were entering and exiting. And this was an area that was under partial siege, and the siege was on the extremists. But also there was a large, like a bread factory right near the checkpoint, and the flour was being provided by the Syrian government, and the bread was being sent into Al-War. Even though when I later went there, I learned that militants were taking the bread terrorists were taking the bread, and they were taking all the food and aid that went in. And I also, on that December 2015 visit, did see truckloads of food going in. Al-Wara was another place that the media, although maybe not as hyped up as Aleppo and other areas, but the media did put all the blame for suffering on the Syrian government. And when I went there in June 2017, I heard the same thing. The terrorists stole our food, and we're glad they're gone now. In June 2017, I visited a place you might be familiar with, and if you're not, you either don't have a TV or you were off the internet for January 2016. It's Madaya. Has anybody here heard of Madaya? Yeah. Have you heard of Madaya's starving? Did you know that Saudi terrorist Abdullah Mahaisni was the originator of that hashtag? And of course, he had the best interests of Syrian civilians in mind when he created that. But in January 2016, overnight, Madaya was the new campaign, and virtually all corporate media were reporting on starvation in Madaya. They were using images that even came from Lebanon and other parts of the world in their efforts to say these people are starving in Madaya. Now, there was starvation, but what media negated was that in October the year prior, the Red Cross and other aid agencies had sent in truckloads of food, enough to last for 2 months. So where did that food go? And they also negated a very important issue, and that is the full siege of Fu and Kafraya in Idlib since March 2015. These villages, since that time and even prior, were under partial siege by the terrorist brigades, including Al-Qaeda, the terrorist brigades of Jaish al-Fatah, or the Army of Conquest. And the people in these villages are on a daily basis subject to mortar and missile terrorism and sniping, and they're starving and deprived medicine. And yet, the corporate media does ignore them, or if they mention them as Shia villages, as if somehow their religious affiliation makes them less of a human being. In Madaya this June, I saw life on the streets as normal in areas of Syria. I also saw a bomb factory hidden behind a large apartment building, out of the way of any sort of Syrian army abilities to target it. And above that bomb factory was a storage room in which, at least one storage room in which terrorist factions stored the food and medical aid that came into Madaya. And just outside the bomb factory was an empty ICRC or Red Cross parcel that was kind of an indicator, and I was told that the storage above the bomb factory had been, the room above the bomb factory had been a storage. So these were some interesting things I noted, but more importantly, I heard the testimonies from civilians, again, saying that the reason they had suffered any starvation was that not only did they hoard the food, but if they sold it to them, they sold it for 3, 4, 5 times the price. So they could not even afford, a kilogram of rice. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of my June 2017 visit to Syria was meeting the boy in the ambulance, Amran Daknish. Now, I'm sure most of you have heard of the boy in the ambulance, and you've seen this epic photo of an adorable boy with cute hair, and he was dusty-faced and looking surprised. And the way corporate media spun it was that in August 2016, he was injured, and his family was injured in a Syrian or Russian airstrike. To my knowledge, not many in corporate media today have bothered to go to Aleppo and speak with Amran and his father, Mohammed Daknish. And Mohammed Daknish said, there were no airstrikes. I heard no airstrikes. He said there was some sort of blast. While he was searching for his family members and putting them in a safe room, his boy, Amran, was snatched. Next thing he knew, Amran is a worldwide sensation. He's the face of suffering in Syria. And I can attest to you, there are thousands of Amrans in Syria. And his father insisted that Amran was not seriously injured. He had a light injury, and it did not merit the attention, and it did not merit the crocodile tears of Mahmoud Raslan, who was the photographer that took the famous photo that circulated the world of Amran in the ambulance. Now, in an interview to one of the British newspapers, Raslan said he cried for Amran and his injuries. But Mahmoud Raslan is buddies with Nuruddin Azinki. So I wonder, did Mahmoud Raslan cry for Abdullah Isa when these terrorists savagely beheaded the boy in 2016? I doubt it. there is one more elephant in the room when it comes to war propaganda constructs on Syria, and that is the entity known as the White Helmets. And my colleague and dear friend Vanessa Beeley, had she been here tonight, would have been addressing that. She has by far done the deepest research into this entity and their funding, their founding, and also following up on the ground in Syria, including taking testimonies from people in Aleppo, as I mentioned, but also including visiting various Syrian civil defense stations and speaking with them and learning about the real Syrian civil defense established many decades ago, unlike the White Helmets established in 2013. So we are told that this group is neutral, nonviolent, and they are volunteers and have saved tens of thousands of civilians in Syria. But in short, the group is not neutral. They are very partial. They work exclusively in Al-Qaeda and other terrorist areas. And they are not all nonviolent. Some of them may be, but their own videos show them present at executions, show them holding weapons, show them holding weapons in their White Helmets uniforms and while cheering with Al-Qaeda. So very clearly not the impartial group that we're told they are. In April 2015, American writer Rick Sterling wrote, "Despite the name, Syrian Civil Defense was not created by Syrians, nor does it serve Syria. Rather, it was created in by the UK and USA in 2013. Civilians from rebel-controlled territory were paid to go to Turkey and receive training in some rescue operations. The program was managed by James Le Mercier, a former British soldier and private contractor whose company is based in Dubai." So then, this is in 2015, and Vanessa Beeley, as I've mentioned, has very diligently exposed their funding, which is now at least $150 million from UK, US, and other states and other bodies. And given that now the White Helmets have again, in spite of all this exposure of their nefarious affiliations, they've again been lauded and they're being praised in the media again as heroes. I think it's fitting to show this brief few-minute video which summarizes who are the White Helmets.
Also known as Syrian Civil Defense, claimed to be an impartial non-government organization campaigning for Syrians. But despite the name, the White Helmets was not created by Syrians, nor does it serve Syria. Meet James Le Mesurier, a consultant for the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office and former British Army officer. So what is a non-Syrian British foreign policy consultant doing establishing a NGO in a foreign country? Does James really have the Syrian people's best interests at heart? If so, why do the White Helmets operate solely in terrorist-held areas? Why has the White Helmets constantly called for the implementation of a NATO-imposed no-fly zone? The same kind of no-fly zone that has destroyed Libya for decades. A no-fly zone in Syria would only benefit those who seek regime change and ultimately hurt the Syrians who are already targeted by illegal sanctions. The fact is, the White Helmets are nothing but a propaganda tool for the US and UK administrations to justify military action against the Syrian government. But the White Helmets insist on being impartial and unarmed, yet here is some footage that says otherwise. Here's where it gets interesting. Meet Raad Saleh. He currently leads the White Helmets inside Syria. He was set to accept an award from Interaction, an alliance of international aid agencies, but was refused entry into the US due to his visa being cancelled for unknown reasons. 27th of April 2016, US Deputy Spokesperson Mark Toner was confronted by journalist Matt Lee about the White House's inconsistency regarding the White Helmets.
You commend this group. You're going to continue to support them, and yet you revoked the visa of their leader. That makes zero sense to me.
Well,
What's exactly?
And then when asked who funded and supported the White Helmets, Mark replies,
well, I can tell you that we provide through USAID about $23 million in assistance to them.
$23 million. Wait a second. Are the White Helmets not, and I quote, fiercely independent and accepts no money from governments? So we have seen a group who is clearly not Syrian, not impartial and not independent, who are armed and are most certainly sectarian. Maybe the White Helmets were set up to facilitate executions like this one. The brave, impartial White Helmets arrive at the scene within seconds of the execution, as if they were on standby, ready to collect the body. The White Helmets. An NGO? Or simply Al-Qaeda with a facelift?
As Vanessa is not here, I'd like to quote something she wrote of her time in eastern Aleppo. She said, "I was in East Aleppo during its final liberation from Nusra Front-led extremism, and during the lead-up to Christmas until the 27th of December. I witnessed the emaciated civilians arriving at the Jibrin Registration Center to receive food, hot drinks, and medical treatment. Medical treatment that the Nusra Front-dominated extremist groups had refused them. We saw a young boy whose foot was missing. He told us he had received no attention for his wounds prior to arriving in Jibrin. He had been injured in a terrorist mortar attack on the district he'd been living in." She says, "I was in East Aleppo between the 9th and 14th of December when the majority of districts were liberated. Every civilian I spoke to said the White Helmets were effectively Nusra Front's civil defense." And she goes on, but, you know, with all the documentation out, you'd think that corporate media might try to regain some respect and regain your respect and investigate them, but instead what they did was they launched a smear campaign against many of us who've looked into the White Helmets, but primarily against Vanessa Beeley. So in December, The Guardian had a tech writer from California write the smear campaign after, in October, having sent emails to myself and Vanessa Beeley, basically saying, are you paid by the Syrian government? We know you are, kind of thing. And the piece was had a heavy dose of Russophobia, of course, and which is the focus of many Guardian pieces, but also did not address any of these key and critical issues. And regarding their Russophobia, they were trying to say that this, challenging of the White Helmets narrative is emanating from Russia. It's all just this big Russia plot and scam. But as I outlined in a rebuttal that I wrote to this piece, in September 2014, Canadian independent journalist Cory Morningstar was the first that I'm aware of who looked into the White Helmets. And she did so looking at the New York-based public relations firm called Purpose Inc. And Morningstar wrote, the White Helmets was one of 4 anti-Assad NGOs or campaigns created by Purpose Inc. And she noted, the message is clear. Purpose wants the green light for military intervention in Syria, well cloaked under the guise of humanitarianism, an oxymoron if there ever was one. So that was 2014, and several writers after her started to investigate this group, including Vanessa Beeley, long before, I have to say before, I'm aware of any Russian media reporting on it. And it's great that they do report on it now, but the whole point is this is not a scam emanating from Russia. This is independent journalists doing what corporate media are covering up. I want to address that both the US and Israel have used chemical weapons on civilians. I lived in Gaza for 3 years and was on the ground in 2009 when Israel used white phosphorus widely on civilian areas throughout Gaza. And I documented some of the remnants of white phosphorus, this one in sponge form, and if you poke at it, it starts flaring up again. And I met a family in Shifa Hospital, the main hospital in Gaza City, during the bombings, and I also met with them afterwards and heard their horrific testimony of essentially losing half their family members, 8 or 9 people, to the white phosphorus bombings on their home. And yet, neither America nor Israel has been held accountable for its use of chemical weapons on civilians, and both America and Israel have appalling hypocritical gall to accuse the Syrian government of using chlorine or sarin against its civilians. And none of these claims have been substantiated. They've been claimed, but they've not been substantiated. They've not been investigated. And in fact, at least in one example, Khan al-Asl, it was shown that the rebels were most likely, if not definitely, the culprits of the chemical weapons attack. Yet this is one of these narratives that has been spun in the attempts to vilify. By the way, on the note of Palestinian rescuers, I just want to say none of the rescuers I worked with in Gaza behaved like a white helmet. They were too busy doing their job. They weren't posing for photo ops. Canadian lawyer Christopher Black, who also has visited North Korea, recently wrote, "The American threats against North Korea continue to mount, and with them the threat of genocide of the people of North Korea by the United States of America and its allies. The meeting of the USA, Canada, and other nations which attacked North Korea in 1950, held in Vancouver, Canada, which some hoped would lead to a political solution, instead took on the character of a meeting of criminals who, by their presence, agreement, and actions, made them parties to a conspiracy to commit genocide against North Korea."
Based on the recent statement of North Korea, I have decided to terminate the planned summit in Singapore on June 12th.
As President Trump pulls out of the historic nuclear disarmament summit with North Korea, we go to Seoul, South Korea, where peace activists have gathered outside the U.S. Embassy condemning Trump's decision.
We believe that it's important for Kim and Trump to pick up the phone and to get back to talks and to have a summit. And we believe that in the peace process, that women must be included in the peace process, and that we want more people-to-people engagement. But we're not waiting for that to happen.
President Trump's canceled plans for a June 12th summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to be held in Singapore. In a letter signed by Trump addressed to Kim, Trump cited Kim's tremendous anger and open hostility in recent comments as his reason for canceling the talks. Trump went on to write, "You talk about nuclear capabilities, but ours are so massive and powerful that I pray to God they will never have to be used." Trump's withdrawal came after North Korea blasted recent comments by Vice President Mike Pence, who suggested Kim Jong-un will end up like slain Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi if he doesn't denuclearize North Korea. On Thursday, President Trump said the U.S. stood ready to attack.
I believe that this is a tremendous setback for North Korea and indeed a setback for the world. I've spoken to General Mattis and the Joint Chiefs of Staff and our military, which is by far the most powerful anywhere in the world, that has been greatly enhanced recently, as you all know, is ready if necessary.
North Korea's foreign ministry called Trump's decision extremely regrettable, but said it stands ready to talk if the White House reverses its position. One day after President Trump canceled plans for a June 12th summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Earlier today, a top official in North Korea's foreign ministry said Kim Jong-un is still willing to meet with Trump at any time, saying the cancellation of the summit was extremely regrettable. In a letter to Kim Jong-un, President Trump cited Kim's tremendous anger and open hostility in recent comments as his reason for canceling the talks. Trump went on to write, "You talk about nuclear capabilities, but ours are so massive and powerful, I pray to God they will never have to be used." President Trump sent the letter at 9:43 a.m. on Thursday, Eastern Time, just hours after North Korea declared it had destroyed one of its nuclear weapons test sites. According to a report from NBC, the decision was made so abruptly the Trump administration did not have time to notify congressional leaders or foreign allies, including South Korean President Moon Jae-in, who had just been in Washington. NBC reports Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has privately blamed National Security Advisor John Bolton for torpedoing the talks. North Korea first threatened to pull out of the talks after Bolton said the U.S. should use the Libyan model for denuclearization. In 2003, Libya negotiated sanctions relief from the United States in exchange for announcing its nuclear program and welcoming international inspectors to verify the dismantlement. 8 years later, the U.S. and other nations attacked Libya, toppling and killing Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. Vice President Mike Pence and President Trump have also talked about the Libyan model in recent weeks. On Thursday, President Trump warned the U.S. military is ready to act if North Korea should take any foolish acts.
I've spoken to General Mattis and the Joint Chiefs of Staff and our military, which is by far the most powerful anywhere in the world, that has been greatly enhanced recently, as you all know, is ready if necessary. Likewise, I have spoken to South Korea and Japan, and they are not only ready should foolish or reckless acts be taken by North Korea, but they are willing to shoulder much of the cost of any financial burden, any of the costs associated by the United States in operations if such an unfortunate situation is forced upon us.
We're joined now by two guests. From Seoul, South Korea, Christine An, founder and international coordinator of Women Cross DMZ, global movement of women mobilizing to end the Korean War. And in Washington, D.C., we're joined by investigative journalist Tim Shurak, who grew up in Tokyo and Seoul and has been writing about the U.S. role in Korea since the late 70s, a correspondent for The Nation and the Korea Center for Investigative Journalism in Seoul.
All they want is kill and kill and kill the opposition. And the opposition is what we want, which is the YouTubers that are responsible and compromise with the truth. I want to stop talking about politics. It's just that in 2016, the elections in the United States, it got me there. I hate to speak about politics, but it's impossible not to speak about politics, because if you want to transcend humanity, if you want to transcend this condition, you have to make decisions in this life that are concerning to you, to your country, to your neighbor, to the world, in terms of ecology, in terms of energy, in terms of logical evolution. How can countries succumb to plutocracy and corporate intelligence agendas? Only devolving systems, only evil devolving systems can take the world to where it is right now. To the point that if you look for peace, if you look for education and understanding, if you look for scientific development, if you look for understanding science, if you prove that they are wrong, they do whatever is in their hands in order to cancel your programs, in order to close your channels. They can't stop us now. We are here to stay. And we believers, which believe in God, or in this case, Christian countries, in Christ himself, we don't care if we get killed. Well, we do, but we took that vow when we started this, and that is live for the country, to live for the country, or to die for it. That's what I learned in the army, and I'm stick with it. Vivir por la patria, o morir por ella. To live for the country, or to die for it. And we're going to seek for justice. And I invite our YouTubers and free thinkers to keep on doing so in order to defeat this monster, this beast that is taking over, that has taken over the world for way too long. Okay, I said my piece. So I also want to I want to tell you guys, the moment an atomic bomb, if you go to against Iran unilaterally, Israel and the United States attack Iran because they incorporate intelligence, it's a beast that is insatiable about war. You're going to start Third World War. You're going to bring war home, United States, through all the bases in the world. And not only that, you're going to kill the world. You're going to bring the war home. and everything that you work for is going to be destroyed. Not mentioning Fukushima Daiichi, that has not stopped in more than 7 years now. Since 2011, when the earthquake created the tsunami that invaded the nuclear station there, reactor, 300 to 400 tons of water has been contaminated since then with radioactive activity, with radioactive substances coming from the reactors uncontrollably. They couldn't close the reactor, they couldn't shut down the reactors, and we have had contamination according to the information gathered in 2017 and the beginning of this year. We have enough radioactivity in the Pacific Ocean to kill hundreds of thousands of species, not to mention the overfishing. Well, and you want to go to war against Iran to start showing off who's got it bigger? Who's got it bigger? I mean, the cloud, the mushroom cloud. If we have Fukushima Daiichi already infecting the world, and you're going to go to war with Iran, you're going to see other civilizations coming home and saying, okay, you stupid idiots, stop it. And maybe God, or the concept of God, or whatever God is, because faith is losing ground in the terms of secularism. You find more liberty in those dictatorships that you call dictatorships in the Western world, like in Libya, Iraq, or Syria before the invasion of the corporate intelligence. They were living at peace. People have the chance in Syria, for example, to participate in politics. Christians, after the invasion, they got killed. The Noon Letter, for example, which is how the terrorist groups mark the houses of their people where you have to enter killing the Christians. They hang them, they chop them into pieces, they crucify them, and they put women tied to columns in order to repent of their sins and confess that they become Muslims. And they were slapped and kicked and hit by whoever passes there in order for her to accept that she was going to convert to Islam. When in Islam, in the Holy Quran, according to the book, you cannot force anyone to convert to your religion. And according to the Quran, in the Asuras, no one is better than any other. The black is no different than the white, etc. Whoever have read the Quran, like I have, understands that the real Islamic people is not to convert you to their religion, but to live in peace, and they have proved it like they did in Syria and Libya. There's a little wars and there's opposition. Sometimes they kill each other. Yes, sure, it happened, but not in the sense that was presented with, according to the corporate intelligence, the corporate media, in the last 50 years, but especially in the last 20 years. So it was impossible for me not to say this, because we who look for the truth have to say it, and we put our life at risk for this. But if we live in foreign countries, we have to support and to oppose the corporate intelligence as is behaving right now, because otherwise the world's going to come to an end. And actually, if God exists, which I do believe, it's time for you to show up. Lord, come on, show up. Show us that you are. The I am of God is here. And I hope that we can see it coming in the clouds, like He promised, pretty soon. For us, for the country, for the world. Hope to see you next time in the next edition of React Today. Au revoir. Goodbye. Hasta pronto.